only presented Bible as evidence for these things. You haven't presented any historical evidence about the resurrection besides the Bible right now. So why should I believe you?
All right, the question is, are the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John historically reliable or not?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Well, how do you determine whether any document is historically reliable or not? In other words, what tests?
Comparison.
What do you mean?
Side-by-side comparison of the events that they laid out and in that order, what contradictions they have in there and what they don't.
Good. That's one of my tests. Internal consistency.
Yes, sir.
And so I'm real glad that we don't just have one gospel. We have 4 different unique eyewitness accounts: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 4 different accounts. We can compare them and contrast them, and we can ask ourselves,
It's mostly contrast, though, no comparison.
are there contradictions within the Gospels that point to massive confusion on the part of the authors?
Yes.
No.
Or
There's a
44,000
tremendous...
denominations would consider you incorrect, sir.
Sir, that doesn't have anything to do with the price of tea in China or anything else.
Yes, it does.
Just because this
You're
guy
talking about
disagrees with me
denominations from your
doesn't mean I'm wrong or that I'm right.
It does.
No, you got to go to the evidence. Just because people disagree tells you nothing about the
We're
facts.
talking about the consistency. If they disagree on what is in there, there is nothing in there that is consistent. They are inconsistent about how they interpret it. Therefore, what's in there is inconsistent.
No. The Gospels, or any document that's written, be it the Quran or the Bhagavad
It's
Gita,
inconsistent as well.
you have to respect and you have to interpret it. But you can't just pull stuff out and cut stuff away. You have to deal with what's there. And no denomination has the right to say, we're going to just rip stuff out and then X other stuff out. It's not intellectually honest. People do it.
So we should be stoning people?
No,
Says to
Jesus
in the
never
Bible.
said to stone people.
He came to uphold the law, not to abolish it. So therefore, the Old Testament is still upheld by your standards of not tossing things out.
Correct.
Yes, sir. Correct.
So you've got to read in context, and it's real clear that the Mosaic Law was designed for a theocracy. The Jewish
Jesus came to
people,
uphold that theocracy. He said so himself.
and in that theocracy, there were horrible practices like polygamy.
Mandated
Now, the
by God.
Mosaic Law does not outlaw polygamy. But when you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, and it's real clear, God never intended polygamy. All right, so what do you think about Jesus Christ?
Fictional character, possibly a real man, but there's plenty of messiahs back in that time that we know of. Historically,
Fictional
sir.
character? Jesus of Nazareth?
Yes.
What year do we live in? Come on, buddy, let's be
Because had a
honest.
calendar, then their myths were real, sir.
Jesus Christ was an historical person who lived, taught, died, and rose from the dead. That's history. That's not mythology. We mark our calendar according to his birth. So come on,
So what? The
think.
new calendar, then that doesn't apply anymore. So is it true then because of no calendar? Is it false because of no calendar? Those aren't
No,
arguments.
I'm just trying to
Those are
point
just
out to you
misleading,
how
misdirection.
illogical you're being when you say Jesus didn't exist.
No, I'm saying
That's
the
illogical.
fictional character of the Bible, that person that performed miracles, is it's way too much for anything to ever have happened. There might have been somebody that was back there that went to certain places and did preach about peace, but there was nothing mystical or divine about it.
All right, fine. But the point is, he was an historical person who really lived.
Maybe
Agreed?
not even by the name Jesus, maybe by Messiah. And
All
there's
right.
plenty of them. So it could have been just a combination of many people named Messiah that contributed to this myth that you're talking
Okay.
about.
So how do you determine whether a document is historically reliable or not?
Evidence like that we have of a Caesar or something like that.
Okay, what
Something that's-
evidence do we have of a Caesar that convinces you Caesar lived?
Okay, well, we have statues that are physical representations of that actual person.
Statues?
We have buildings, we have paintings, we have pottery.
We have statues of Zeus.
We have
Does that
multiple
mean Zeus
documents
lived?
from multiple historians.
Multiple historians. Good. There we go. I don't believe Caesar existed because there's a statue of Caesar. There's statues of Zeus. There's statues
no, I'm
of...
saying the combination of all that evidence there. From
So I don't trust statues to tell me who existed or not. What I trust is eyewitness testimony. People saw George Washington be inaugurated first president of the United States. That is historical knowledge based on the trustworthiness of eyewitness
don't
testimony.
base 2,000-year-old evidence on eyewitness stuff. That has to be physical artifacts, sir. Things that were like George Washington 200 years ago is a huge difference. Huge difference, especially with the technology we have to record that information. And the fact that other people recorded that disliked Washington is evidence that he did exist as a person, and it takes away that myth that backs him up. The people that believed in Jesus Christ and wrote about him were writing about him as a fictional character. They were all about him specifically. There's no contradiction, except for maybe in the Quran where he's just a prophet. And if you take all that and you divide it up, and you kind of look at it, he could have possibly existed as a man that had some good beliefs, but other than that, it's been exaggerated.
All right, excuse me, ma'am. So what is your point? What is your point about Jesus Christ? Do you think he lived or not?
You can't say for sure. What I think it is there's a majority of, there's a bunch of messiahs. If you go over to the Middle East right now, which I've been, okay, there's messiahs over there right now trying to tell you that they know who God is. Yeah, and that's exactly what was happening back then. There's multiple people doing it.
But now, how did Jesus live his life? So Jesus made some incredible claims.
You're still talking about one person. I think it was a majority. I think personally it was multiple messiahs, and that they took all those different stories, compiled it to benefit themselves in controlling people like you right now.
Like I'm controlling people?
Listen to him.
I'm controlling people?
No. What I'm saying is raising people up through the doctrine is controlling them in that sort of manner, sir.
Fine. But we're here having an open-minded discussion, and nobody has to be here, right? You're here because you choose to be.
Because it's America, not because of your religion, sir.
Fine. But reality is people are here because they choose to be, not because they have to be.
Yeah.
All right? Now, the reason that I trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to give me accurate historical information is because, first of all, the internal harmony. 4 different eyewitness accounts, no contradictions, internal consistency.
Wrong. Side-by-side comparison, you can do it yourself. There's tons of internal contradictions, especially if you do it on...
Give me one.
I can't name them off.
How unfortunate.
Okay, oh no, I got one. I just remember one. Sorry, it's hard to do off the top of my head. Matthew it didn't end the book with the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
He didn't?
No. The oldest text that we have do not have that in there. The rest of them do. Seems like a very important thing to have.
That's a very interesting point. The only problem is you got it wrong. It's not Matthew, it's Mark you're talking about. The end of Mark is not in the earliest Greek manuscripts, not Matthew. Okay, so let's try and keep our facts straight.
Okay, my bad. It's a name.
It's all right.
I don't
so
do
it's
this
the Gospel
right,
of Mark,
John,
you're
obviously.
right. The end of the Gospel of Mark is not in some of the earliest Greek manuscripts. But sir, before that questionable ending of Mark, the tomb of Jesus Christ is empty. The resurrection is clearly taught in the Gospel of Mark. The resurrection appearances are not recorded in the earliest form of Mark, but the empty tomb is right there.
Okay, so
you do not have a dead Christ at the end of Mark. You have a resurrected Christ at the end of Mark. So the Gospels are totally consistent. Jesus lived a sinless life. He taught amazing ethical teachings. He died on a cross to forgive us for our sin, and he rose from the dead.
He could have sinned there. There's plenty of room in there for him to have sinned.
Fascinating point. You're right. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not playmates with Christ at the age of 12, 13, and 10.
Yeah.
But they lived with Christ for 3 years. And in those 3 years, they observed that Christ never sinned once.
Not once.
Not once. In fact, in John chapter 8, Jesus could look into the faces of his enemies and say, "Which one of you can prove me guilty of sin?" And his enemies were silent. So the overwhelming evidence is Christ lived a magnificent life.
Okay, so that's not evidence. That's hearsay from a book that you still have yet to validate, sir.
All right, so the first piece of evidence that the Gospels are reliable is internal consistency. The second piece of evidence that the Gospels are reliable is literary style.
So if I wrote on a napkin, this napkin is consistent because it's on the napkin and it's the consistency of the napkin. Does that mean that it's true, sir, because it's written consistently? No.
You're not listening.
I am listening.
No, you're not.
You keep giving us like very misleading
I did not say if you write on a napkin or if you write on a piece of paper something. We had 4 different authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When you read those 4 unique, different accounts of Christ, there are no contradictions. There's an internal consistency. That is what I said. Now please get the wax out of your ears and listen.
There's not.
And then respond to what I say. Don't respond to what I don't say. Respond to what I say. I respond to what you say. Now respond to what I say, which means you got to listen. So listen.
I'm listening.
All right. Third test. When any document claims to be historically reliable is archaeology.
Yes.
Does archaeology validate Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Nazareth?
No, it doesn't. No historical record of
Nazareth.
How
does it not?
When historically Jesus should have been there.
Pardon?
There's no historical evidence of Nazareth being there when historically when Jesus
Yes,
was
there
there.
is.
There's not.
Well, I'm sorry, I had to study that because a student at UCSB challenged me on that. I had to go back and clearly farm tools, inscriptions in caves show that Nazareth was a very small town in the 1st century AD. Crystal clearly, archaeology
So what
shows
are you
that.
using? You're using carbon dating to verify when exactly that was, sir? Are you using technology to do that?
We're using archaeology, and we're using
What are you using
inscriptions
to
in
date it,
caves, and we're using farming tools and the dating of farming tools.
Okay, so
in Nazareth. Nazareth was a
so the
1st
scientific
century
measurements
Palestinian
to
town.
determine your farming tools date are good for you, but not good enough to tell you that the Earth is billions of
I
years
can promise
old.
you, sir, I didn't do the study. I'm not an archaeologist.